All right, what we're going to be looking at today, writing our functions and our models. So we've done a very good job at the beginning of the chapter taking the graphs, taking the equations, and putting them on the graph. Basically, today what we're doing is the reverse of that. We're going to look at the data, and we're going to write a model for that data. Look at the data, and we're going to write a model for that data. Now, we're going to specifically be looking at what are called sinusoids. Sinusoids simply are a fancy name for the graphs of the sine and the cosine functions. The sine and the cosine functions. Now, we should remember, or I hope certainly that we remember, that our sine function always has an equation of y is equal to a sine of b times the quantity of x minus h plus k. And my cosine always has the equation y is equal to a cosine b of the quantity of x minus h plus k. The sine and the cosine graph. Now, the a, the b, the h, the k, they do some stuff for me. We know that when we were working on graphing these, we would find the amplitude. How did we find the amplitude? Beautiful. The absolute value of A. Now, as we're looking to write our models today, we need to look at that amplitude in another light. Remember, the amplitude is the distance from the middle of that graph to the top and from the middle of that graph to the bottom. Another way to calculate that distance from the middle to the top and the middle to the bottom is the absolute value of the max minus the min divided by 2. So the absolute value of the max minus the min divided by 2. All right. We also found the period of our graph. How do we calculate the period of a sine or a cosine graph? Beautiful. 2 pi over the absolute value of b. All right. How do we know what the horizontal shift is? How do we know what it is shifting left and right? The h. Remember, the x minus the h, it's the opposite of what is with the x in both cases. All right, and my vertical shift. K. What it is shifting up and down is by the k value. All right, now, for some of you, you're going to be happy with this. There is a recipe. There is a very nice order to be able to calculate to find the model. All right, so the steps for finding my model. First of all, first thing I need to know, I need to find those maximum and those minimum values. I need to find the maximum and the minimum values. Because in step 2, those maximum and minimum values help me find the vertical shift. It helps me to figure out how much my graph has been shifted up or down. Now, that vertical shift is going to be the average of the maximum and the minimum because the average tells me where the middle is. Add up the max and the min, divide by 2. I will find the middle of that graph. So my k value is always going to be the max plus the min, divide by 2. All right. Third thing I need to know, I need to decide if my graph is a sine graph or a cosine graph. Now, just a comment. My sine graph starts where? All right, sine starts at the origin, goes up, comes down, goes back for one cycle. My cosine starts where? Either at the maximum or if it's reflected, it will start at the minimum. It'll go all the way to the minimum and all the way back to that maximum for the first cycle. Now, I need to look at my graph and I need to figure out if it's going to be a sine graph or a cosine graph. If it starts in the middle of that graph, it's going to be a sine graph. If it starts at the top or at the bottom, at the maximum or the minimum, I'm going to write it as a cosine graph. Now, we should realize, or I certainly hope that we realize, do sine and cosine look similar? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They have the same wave. They just simply start in different places. So please tell me or let me know if it doesn't make sense. Isn't it true that cosine is just sine shifted? If I take sine and I shift it to the left this much, I actually get a cosine graph. If I take sine and cosine and I shift them back and forth, left and right, horizontally, I can turn one into the other. So one of our big tasks is simply to make sure that we pick the easiest one to write the equation of. I can always write either, but I want to pick whichever one is easiest. So I do not have to deal with those horizontal shifts, because they're messy. We know that from when we made the graphs. The horizontal shifts can be messy. Okay, last but not least, we need to find the amplitude. Remember, that's the absolute value of A, which is the absolute value of the max, minimum, minimum divided by 2, and the period, which is the 2 pi over the absolute value of B, to help me find the A and the B. To help me find the A and the B values. Yes, sir. Okay, remember our H is going to be accounted for because I'm going to make the choice between sine or cosine. Okay? Does that make sense? That accounts for that shifting left or right. I'm going to make a choice on which one works the best. Okay? We're only going to be looking at graphs that either start in the middle or at the maximum or the minimum. Okay? We'll leave the rest of that fun for next year. All right. Okay, let's take a look at number 1. It's a beautiful graph there. Write the trigonometric functions for the following graphs. All right, looking good. Beautiful things here. What is the first thing I'm looking for? All right. Look at my recipe. What is the first thing I want to calculate? Max and the min. Okay. All right, what is my maximum value in this graph? 2. It goes up to 2. And what's my minimum value? It goes down to -2. All right, so far so good. Now we use that maximum and that minimum to help me find what? The K. That max and min help me to find the vertical shift. Because that vertical shift, the K value, is going to be the max plus the min divided by 2. What is my vertical shift in this one? 2 plus -2 divided by 2 is 0. I just got a question for you. Did that thing shift up or down? No, we should be able to recognize that because look at, my x-axis does cut that graph in half. If my x-axis cuts that graph in half, I know that it has not been shifted up or down. We okay with that? All right, let's take a look. My third one. Third part, I need to decide between what? All right, is it going to be sine or is it going to be a cosine graph? All right, how do we know that it's going to be cosine? All right, cosine, because it starts at its minimum value. Now, I got a question for you, though. There's something else that we know about this cosine graph when it starts at its minimum value. All right, it is a reflection over that x-axis. So because it has been reflected over that x-axis, my A value has to be negative in the end. That A value has to be negative. All right, continuing on. All right, what's next? All right, got to find that amplitude. Okay, so we know that the amplitude, the absolute value of A, is equal to the absolute value of the maximum minus the minimum divided by 2. Yes, sir?
What is the maximum that we're going to get from the minimum?
I will show you if it's been shifted up and down, it will be. If there is a shift vertically, my max and my min will not be like +6 and -6. Okay? All right. So the absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of, well, my maximum here is 2. Subtract my minimum of -2 divided by 2. Well, the absolute value of A is going to come out to be what then? Okay? So what is my A? Negative 2. I know it's got to be negative because it was reflected over that x-axis. So my A has to be a negative 2. Are we okay with that? All right. What do I need next? All right. All right. So we know that the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of B. All right. Now I got to go to my graph. I got to go to my graph because my graph is going to help me calculate that period. My graph is going to help me calculate that period. What is the period of this graph? How'd you get it? Huh? What's the only thing they give me on this graph? They give me pi over 3 as a horizontal distance. Now, pi over 3 takes me from here at the beginning to this point. From the minimum up to the maximum. Now, how much of the first cycle is that? Half. So if a third is at a half, what do I do to find the whole? Yeah, double pi over 3 means that this has got to be at 2 pi's over 3 for my whole first cycle. So the horizontal length of that first cycle is going to be 2 pi over 3. Now, let's use our mental math skills here. If 2 pi over 3 is equal to 2 pi over the absolute value of B, what does B have to be? Yeah. I mean, what would I do to solve this if I didn't know? Yeah, fraction equal to fraction, I'm going to cross multiply. But in this case, I don't need to because I should know 2 pi, 3, it's got to be 3. So my B is going to be 3. Now, we are always going to make the assumption that that B is positive. We are always going to make the assumption that that B is positive. And you can add that back up here if you would like. Always making the assumption that that B is going to be positive. All right. Now, we need to write the equation. So, y is equal to, how's this going to start out? My A value is negative 2. Cosine, I chose a cosine graph of, my B value is 3, X, what about H? Didn't shift left and right. What about K? There was no vertical shift up and down. Are we okay with that? Yes, sir. It will always give you a place that it will be easy to calculate the period. Yes. Yep. Anything else? Okay, let's continue on. All right, let's try number 2 here. Another beautiful one. All right. So looking at number 2 here, what's the first thing we're going to do? All right, need our max and our min. All right. Ashlyn, what is that max? Okay, I promise you on a quiz or a test it will be blatantly obvious, but this actually happens to be about 1.5. Yes, we're going to assume it's 1.5 on a quiz or a test. I promise you it will be blatantly obvious, or I will tell you. Okay, so my maximum's at 1.5. What is my minimum? Negative 1.5 as well. All right, now I need that maximum and minimum for what, Becky? All right, is that what I want to do second? Find the amplitude? It does help me find the amplitude, absolutely. Okay, yep. We're going to figure out if it's sine or cosine. What do I want to do second? Vertical shift. I like to do them in order. That doesn't mean you have to do them in this order. I just like to keep it consistent so that I don't miss anything. So first I'm going to find the maximum and the minimum, which is going to help me to find that vertical shift. My K value is the vertical shift. Now my vertical shift is always going to be the max plus the min divided by 2. So 1.5 plus negative 1.5 divided by 2 is 0. Notice, my x-axis, there's no vertical shift. My x-axis cuts this graph in half. It has not been moved up or down. We should be able to identify that and know that from my graph. All right. Where do I go next? Tara, what are you thinking we should do next? All right. Do you have a thought on if it's going to be sine or cosine? How do you know, or why did you make the choice of sine? Beautiful. It starts at the origin. It actually starts on the middle of that graph. When it starts at the middle of my graph, I know it's going to be a sine graph. Now, is there anything else I know when I look at this? It's upside down, right? My sine starts by going down to the minimum first. If it starts by going down to the minimum, what does that tell me? You bet. There was a reflection, and my A is negative. Very nice. There is a reflection, and my A value is negative. Beautiful, beautiful. All right, where do we go next, Ben K? All right, got to find the amplitude. The amplitude says the absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of my max minus my min divided by 2. And what else am I going to be finding? I'm going to be calculating the period to help me find that B. 2 pi over the absolute value of B. Go ahead. Use your amplitude to find the A. Use your period to find the B. Multitasking back here. Are you trying to graph them? You got it in radians? If you need help, let me know, let me know. How much is a tick mark if I don't tell you how much? 1, absolutely. Don't. I know that you're so used to working with these sine and cosine and this trig stuff and you want to throw pi in there. A tick mark is 1 if you haven't been told anything else. So far, so good? All right. So let's take a look here at what we got. All right. Amplitude. Absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of my maximum 1.5. Subtract my minimum, which is negative 1.5, all divided by 2. So the absolute value of A is going to end up to be what? Yeah, 1.5 subtract a negative, 1.5 plus 1.5 is the absolute value of 3/2. Now, if the absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of 3/2, what is my A? All right, it is a reflection, so my A is going to be a negative 3/2. Oh, don't forget that. It's really easy to forget that. All right, now my period's 2 pi over the absolute value of B. What is the period of this graph? All right, here's the start to my minimum, back to the x-axis, up to the maximum, back to the x-axis. This is one full cycle. How long did it take me to get there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Don't overthink. So my period is 6, equal to 2 pi over the absolute value of B. Question, how are we going to solve that? Yeah, 6 over 1, we're going to cross multiply. So 6 times the absolute value of B is equal to 2 pi. Divide both sides by 6, and the absolute value of B is pi over 3. Now, that means that B is positive pi over 3. Always be assuming it is positive. All right, so my equation. All right, can you give me my equation there, Lena? Yep. Beautiful. Y is equal to A value, negative 3/2. Sine, because I chose it, was going to be a sine graph. My B value, pi over 3. X, no shift up and down, now or left and right. Not worrying about H, now worried about K. Okay, let's try number 3 together. One more like this, and then hopefully we can take a look at some other things. All right, taking a look at number 3, looking at this beautiful graph. He's a good one. All right, looking at this nice graph, Hunter, where do we start? All right, sir, can I ask you what is my maximum value on this graph? Nice. And what's my min? Beautiful. All right. Max is 10, min is 2. So what do I use my max and my min for? Yep. I'm going to use it for amplitude. What am I going to use it for first? I'm going to see if there is a vertical shift. Has this been shifted up or down? I mean, you can see that. It's not above or below the x-axis anymore. It definitely has been shifted up. We need to figure out how much it's been shifted up. So my K value is always the max plus the min divided by 2. All right. So my max is 10 plus 2 divided by 2 is 6. Notice it's been shifted up 6, because if I go up 6 and I make a horizontal line at 6, does that cut my graph in half? It better. That horizontal line cuts that graph in half. All right. Now, where do we go from there, Ben H? All right, and what are you thinking we should use? How do you know it's going to be cosine? You sound pretty sure about that. All right, it starts at my maximum value, so we know that it's going to be a cosine graph. What kind of A am I going to have with this cosine? Positive. It starts at the maximum, so my A is going to be a positive value. I don't need to worry about that. All right. All right. Brianna, what do we do next? All right, we're going to calculate using the amplitude. So the absolute value of A is equal to the absolute value of my max minus my min divided by 2. All right, absolute value of A is equal to absolute value of my maximum of 10, subtract my minimum of 2, all divided by 2. Absolute value of A is going to be what?
4.
Yeah, 8 divided by 2 is 4.
So are we ever going to get a graph like this and have to graph it as sine?
I'm going to let you choose the most efficient and the smartest way to choose. Okay? I want you to make that choice about efficiency. Which one's the best to use? And by far, cosine's better to use on this one. Okay? All right. Now, That means my A is positive, so my A is a positive 4. All right, Heather, what else do we need? All right, the period is 2 pi over the absolute value B. Now in this graph, do you know what the period is? 4 pi, very nice, very nice. Notice from the top to the bottom of this graph, from the top to the bottom of this graph is 2 pi. That's halfway through. So if I double it, that means to get it back to my maximum value is going to be a distance of 4 pi. So the period is 4 pi, which is equal to 2 pi over the absolute value of B. All right, Aaron, how do I start finding the B there? Cross multiply. We're going to put that over 1. Cross multiply. 4 pi times the absolute value of B is equal to 2 pi. Then what? Beautiful. I love to divide by 4 pi. And what do we get for that absolute value of B? Beautiful. Pi's are going to cancel. 2/4 is a half. We know our B is positive, so it's got to be positive 1/2. Fantastic. All right, let's see. Jacob, what's the equation then?
Y equals 4 cosine 1/2 x plus 6.
Very nice. Y is equal to my A value of 4. I chose it to be cosine. My B value of 1/2 x, and I shifted it up 6, so plus 6. Fantastic. Beautiful, beautiful. Questions with that one? All right. Now, let's take a jump ahead here. Let's skip to number 6. Looking at a data set. Looking at a data set. Table shows the number of sunlight hours H for each month during 1 year in Anchorage, Alaska. Time T is months. T is first month is January. Use your grapher. Write the trig model that gives H as a function of T. All right. Look at what this data is telling you. January, Anchorage only gets 5.7 hours of sunlight a day on average. Cannot for the life of me figure out why you'd want to live there. I have an aunt and uncle that live in Fairbanks, which is even further north, less sunlight. I cannot figure out why you'd want to live there and subject yourself to minimal sunlight and like 30 degrees below zero every day in the winter. Crazy. But in July, boy, it's gorgeous. 19 hours of sunlight. Sweet. All right. Now, we are going to use our grapher to help us find the equation for these trig functions. So, grab your machine. Grab your machine. Think about how far you've come with this machine. Turn it on. Clear out whatever's in there. All right. With your machine, what menu are we going to go to? Stat. Absolutely. We got to go put our data in the stat. So we're going to go to the edit. All right. Whatever's in there, bunch of crud. Go up to L1, hit clear. Go up to L2, hit clear, and get rid of the crud that's in there. Take out L1 and L2. Now, what are we going to be choosing for our L1? The T, the months. All right. So we're going to put in 1 through 12. See, there aren't 13 months. Whoops. All right. What's going in L2? What about L2?
H.
All right. Going to be my hours of sunlight. All right. Where do we go to have our calculator help us out with the equation? Back to stat. Beautiful. Going back to that stat menu. But this time I want to do what? Calculate. I want the calculator to actually do some calculating. And what is it that I want my calculator to calculate? What do we want my calculator to find? All right, here's the deal. My grapher will only, it doesn't make a choice. My calculator does everything in sine. We don't get to pick between sine or cosine. And it's not smart enough to figure out which one's the best. My calculator does everything with sine. So I'm going to go to C, which is sine regression. And I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to hit enter a final time. All right, now there's a couple of things we need to really focus on. My equation is y is equal to a sine parentheses bx plus c plus d. Now notice in this case then my equation is y is equal to round to the 100th. What is this going to be to the 100th? 6.64 sine parentheses 0.51x plus negative 1.82 plus 12.31. Okay, now here's the deal. This equation looks a little bit different. I hope that we can recognize that it looks a little bit different. What is different in this equation? All right, they distributed the b. So my a is the same as we're used to. The k is really their d. It shifted up 12.31. But this graph does not shift right 1.82 because they distributed my b value. If I wanted to truly find my h, what would I need to do? I'd have to divide out the 0.51 and put him all the way in the front. And negative 1.82 divided by the 0.51 is actually what my h value would be. Does that make sense? I am not certain. I have no idea why they do that. Because this equation does not show my horizontal shift left and right. If they would divide out the b and put it in front, it would show that horizontal shift left and right. But I just want you to understand that it does show the a, it does show the k, it does show my b, but it does not show my h as we're used to it, unless I would divide by the 0.51. Are you okay with that? Any questions? Are you sure? Okay.